Welcome to the studio of Jesse James Hunt. I have just been starting to dabble in photography and shooting only in RAW, as RAW is a great way to edit your photos. It gets more clarity at the end, so you can kind of underexpose and get those things back that you may have lost. And so I like to look at RAW as developing film, and so you can mess the exposure up a little bit, but as a developer you can change that. And so this photo is a little bit overexposed, I think, and so I mean this would be truly overexposed. It's at a good level where it was, but I tend to want to get an image that's a little bit more dramatic for lighting, so getting those skin tones correctly, remembering that. And it also gives you options to do very low lighted stuff like this, which also looks cool. So we're gonna mess with that, the exposure, because this isn't a JPEG. Usually you don't want to mess with exposure, but because it's a raw image, you can do so and get the correct lighting that you were seeking after in the original form of taking the photo. If you can see, brightness kind of changes the whole scene, light or dark, and so I kind of like that one. Right now I got a good glowing light and a good silhouette in the back, and so I kind of enjoy that. Next part, these are usually unchecked. In order to do anything with them, you must check them. And so enhance, you can also start messing with the lighting and the color. So the contrast of the image, you go up, and the whole thing kind of have a light film on top. Go down, it darkens the whole thing in general. I kind of like it usually right about where it was. Clarity is a way to clarify the skin and the highlights in the background. And so if you go way dramatic, you'll see that it picks up every shadow and light and exaggerates them, almost making it look like mountain ranges. And so you don't want to do that for the most part, unless you're doing like a HDR photo. I'm not a big fan of those. So I usually clarify a lot, the clarity, to get the image to look smooth and a little bit more film-like. Okay, saturation, if you bring it up, it changes the saturation of color and kind of highlights that all in the skin. It's way too much, making it look orange. I usually start with where it left off, 0%. Go down, it's gonna turn it into a grayscale. Stick with pretty much what it gave me. I go up one or two. Vibrance is the same thing, but saturation has more of an effect. So if I go down on the vibrance, kind of takes the color away a little bit. If I go way up, it tries to add a little more orange, but I generally leave it where it was. Kind of scale around with it, but I want a little color in there. Okay, white balance is next. If you click on it, you can, if you go up on yellow, it's going to warm everything up. Changes the color of everything. So I generally don't mess with that. I want the skin tone to be a little more orange. But if I want the background to be a little more gray, like it originally was, go down on it, making it cold. Same thing with tint. I don't mess with this one as much because it turns things green. And as you can see, but if you want that effect, sometimes fun to work with. And it goes magenta the other way. Cold makes it cooler. I'll just go back to 1% or 0. Last but not least, I'll just delete that. There's shadows and highlights. If I go dark, I'm gonna add some dark shadows. Or if I go light, it's gonna add highlights to everything. So generally don't need to mess with that too much. Highlights, if I go super bright, it's going to add a little splash of white there. And this one's already kind of washed out a little bit. So if I go down on the highlights, it deletes that splash there. Some people want that, and so it's a very quick shift. I'm going to do only a little bit of highlight because it's already pretty much well there. Okay, and so this is at this point you can see what we started with and where we're after we exposed it, where we're going. And so in order to develop the film at this point, or the image, not really film, but I like to pretend, push develop, and it will develop up here. And it takes about 10 to 15 seconds. So the process is slightly lengthy because unlike a JPEG, you have to kind of edit and then edit again. At this point, it is developed. At this point, if there's any kind of major flaw on the skin, big zit or scar that the person requested, you can get rid of that by going to healing brush tool. If you hold it, you'll get more options, but I usually just use the healing brush tool. It gives you this little crosshair, and so if there's something right here, you hold down Alt, click where you want the tone to look like or to be like, and then you can scrub it out. Of course, I usually zoom in and show you that, but I'm not going to do anything here, so I'm going to Command Z until it makes that noise, or as many times as you click the button, pretty much. All right, so moving on. There's only a few other adjustments I like to make. Sometimes I like to do split toning. Oops, split toning. And the only way to look at this is to drag this up. I don't see any big differences. Usually you do. So there's not a lot of highlights to mess with. Oh, you're seeing it there, right in the chest. Look here. If I change this to magenta, maybe you'll see it more. See right there, it got red on the cheeks. And so that means there's not a lot of highlights, but you can kind of change the tone as you see. Sometimes if you really like that, you can kind of change the light as it's hitting the skin. But for me, this picture doesn't have enough highlights to really make a difference, but you'll be able to see it in the shadow. If I want to make this thing look more vintage, you can change the shadows. Turquoise to blues, the light blues, the magentas, pinks, purples, all that. So I usually try to look at this with my eye. Blue's really interesting. With a little opposite of blue, not much going on there. So you can mess with the balance of that. Go. And so you can mess with that, see if you like it. And I kind of like that, even though it's something I wouldn't normally do. I'm just kind of having fun here. And so if you like it, go ahead and merge it. If you don't, reset, and that'll get rid of that whole split toning thing. So you can merge it if you like it. And it gives you this image that you have now. It looks a lot better than what we started with. But there's one more thing I usually like to do is the soft proofing. And I just start with something. And you have to click a few times. There it goes. And you can look around at different options and see what you get. I like to use the Japanese coated or uncoated. The coated one's a little tame right now because it must have been the colors. Uncoated, really stylized, but it looks pretty. It's just a little too cloudy for me. So you can mess with the opacity by sliding it around, and it just kind of makes this cool look. And so it softens the whole thing, makes the image a little more photographic or like an old filmy style that I like. And so I'll merge those together. And that's pretty much the image as I like it. But remember, we did all those updates. We made different fixes, but you still have to save it usually into a file that can be usable, because the NEF or RAW files are not too usable to too many people. So you go to File, Export, and you can pick if it's a PNG, JPEG, GIF, TIFF. All those options are there. I usually save it at a high quality. If you save it at a best quality, I'll show you what it does. Calculating, it's 10 megabytes, and so I usually go high quality, and it's only 1.5 megabytes, and so it's easier to send to somebody. You can go even lower if you're sending them thumbnails, or you don't want them to steal the image for a proof or something like that. So that's a good way to go. And then go ahead and push export. And then I save mine with an F at the end to say that I finished it or finalized it. And then push save. And it would be saved to where you just saved it to, and that's pretty much how I go about editing raw images into Affinity Photo. And it's something I just started learning. So if you enjoyed that, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know. And if you want to know more about portrait photography, I'm game to answer any questions.